driving the economy in Shanghai. And then at the same time, a year later, in Europe, the Nazi Germany had already started building up his effort to encourage Jews to emigrate. And you can tell you much more about the Nazi policies. But first, because the Nazi racial policy had been building up for years in Germany. So when the Nazis annexed Austria, overnight everything changed for Jews in Austria. Suddenly they were under similar discriminatory policies and laws as their counterparts in Germany. So that was a tremendous shock for them. So they definitely started looking for a way out of Austria. To the United States, to France, to Italy, anywhere they could get to. But it was really the Kristallnacht, the pogrom, the violence against Jews that took place over November 9th and 10th. It's destroyed synagogue, and you can see the aftermath below with the Jewish star. And that was really a wake up for them because in that part of Europe, Jews had never seen such level of physical violence because they had been integrated culturally, socially, politically, economically for so long, for generations. So they realized Germany and Austria, Europe was no longer going to stand for them. So they felt very betrayed by the neighbors and started looking for a way out. So during the Kristallnacht, about 20,000 men and women, I mean just men, were arrested and sent off to concentration camps at Sachsenhausen, Dachau, and Fürstenwalde, and who were wives, mothers, daughters. The way to get these men out was to get a ticket out of Europe, a proof of emigration. So it was easier to obtain tickets than visas in many cases because of the worldwide immigration restrictions, especially in the United States, Canada, in Australia, in some parts of South America. Nobody wanted the refugees. So, but rumors went around that Shanghai was an open port. So all these women went searching for those tickets to get their men out, and they had to pay an extremely high price for them because the demand was so high. And so, but what was fascinating is that they realized they could actually emigrate as families. So these people could bring along their elderly parents if they were willing to leave Germany and Austria, and they could take their children along. In many cases of immigration, families had to be broken up, especially with the case of kinder transport, which about 10,000 children were sent away to safety in the UK, France, and the United States. So Shanghai, at the end, looking back, it was a community of families. So these refugees began to leave in droves from early 1939 up until roughly around 1941. First they went to Italy. They also could depart from German ports at Hamburg with ships through the Mediterranean down the Suez Canal and around Asia up to Shanghai. But then when the Germans invaded to occupy part of Italy in 1940, the refugees, those ports were closed. So the refugees now had to go through the Soviet Union through the Trans-Siberian Railway, which they took all the way across to the Vladivostok and took ship down to Japan and moved down the coast to Shanghai. And that route was closed off in 1941 because of the German invasion of the Soviet Union. So at that point, when, although I should say, it was true that no visa were needed, but that rule changed in middle 1939 because the British and the Shanghai Municipal Council were becoming very concerned about these impoverished Jewish refugees not having good luck, but was also very anti-Semitic. They also held anti-Semitic views, so they wanted the Japanese to impose strict control. And so it was agreed that the Japanese did not want to because they wanted financial support of the American Jews, which have been answered more in the Q&A. At the end, a compromise agreement was made that Jews had to have visas to enter Shanghai, or they could pay $500 per head to enter. Therefore, the Chinese government left the diplomats in Vienna and Berlin across Europe to know about this in order to circumvent the Japanese. But the embassy in Berlin was very much allied pro-Nazi, and he refused to stamp any visa, but the consulate in Vienna kept on stamping for the Jews in Austria. So it worked out, although at the end it was more of a trickle, because other countries started opening up the doors, like the Dominican Republic, and then other South American countries. So next slide. So at this point, in 1941, toward the end of 1941, the regime changed from the Treaty Port era to the Japanese occupation. So the Japanese had taken over parts of Shanghai, after Pearl Harbor, before all the different wars were declared. So then the Japanese took over the rest of Shanghai. Although because Shanghai was an enormous city with a very complex economy, the Shanghai Municipal Council was allowed to run for another year until the treaties were resolved between the Chinese nationalists and other European powers, especially the United States, Britain, and France, in exchange for military alliances and resources. So at that point, the Japanese said, okay, no council will take over from here. And then quite soon afterwards, you see here is the proclamation against stateless European stateless refugees who had arrived in 1937 to be moved into a military designated area. Those were all just bureaucratic language meant to combine Jewish refugees from Poland, from Germany, Austria, and Czechoslovakia into this 1 square mile area. And roughly half of that community were already living outside, about 8,000, had to be moved in. And therefore, there was not enough space, not enough housing. So what did the Japanese do? They evicted all the Chinese out. At least 8,000 Chinese out of their homes to make room for the Jewish refugees. And the old Chinese who were evicted, they were literally left on the streets. There's a very interesting dynamic that happens after the war, which my book explores. And the time during the Japanese occupation was very difficult, as Mary will attest. A lot of the Japanese occupation has to do with the latent economic anti-Semitism. They believe that Jews were powerful, they were wealthy, they could do no wrong, and they could benefit. So which is why they resist the Germans' orders were which to have the Jews exterminated or somehow disappear from China, from the world. So in ways some scholars, especially in Japan today, argue that Japan saved the Jews, but for China also argues save the Jews too. So it's a very interesting post-World War II memory battle going on today. We have to talk more during the Q&A as well. But one of the things I want to bring up is the character Mr. Goya. He was a Japanese, high-ranking Japanese official. You will see him in the play. He was a short man, and he was incredibly abusive to the Jewish refugees who wanted to leave the ghetto or the designated area for work, for an errand. You had to get a pass to leave. And dealing with him was incredibly unpredictable. So for him, for many Jewish refugees, he was among the most memorable things about the lives of Shanghai, because he was so cruel and to everybody, except for the children. He loved the children. So I want to highlight, you'll see how he responds to the refugees in the play. Next slide, please. So once the war ended in 1945, it was a moment of reckoning for Jews and Chinese to what they had just survived, especially the Jewish refugees in Shanghai who had truly believed their lives were hell. That was the first time they heard about the Holocaust in Europe, because the Japanese censors had cut them off from the world. No mail, no radio, except for the Soviet radio, no nothing. So it was a tremendous shock for them. So liberation was very uneasy for both the Chinese and Jews, but nonetheless, liberation had meant that because of the treaties have been dissolved, the Japanese had been defeated and kicked out. This meant that the Chinese nationalists now could regain full sovereignty of Shanghai, and this had a very serious implication for the Jewish refugees who were actually seen as foreigners. And because they were very impoverished, they had no money, and they were supported by a wealthy American Jewish organization. They were an easy target for any kind of anti-foreign sentiment, although they came across as anti-Semitic trope. So many of them felt very, very compelled to leave China very quickly, and grateful they were to be safe from the extermination camps, such as Auschwitz. So I will take a moment to say thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Halpern. It is now my honor to call Manny Gabler to the podium to share his experiences as a survivor and Shanghailander. Manny was only 1 year old when he arrived in Shanghai with his parents, and he has devoted himself to educating people across the country about the Holocaust and about survival in the ghetto of Shanghai. Please join me in welcoming Manny Gabler.
Good evening. I'm here to tell you about my experience as a Jewish refugee in World War II Shanghai, China, and how my family and 18,000 other Jews survived the Holocaust there. These are childhood memories. I lived in the movement as children do, and did not realize the horrors of what I saw until later in my life. Both my parents died young from the stress of survival and raising 2 children in war-torn foreign countries. By the time I was to ask about the past, they were gone. My parents were Simon and Irmgard. My mother wasn't Jewish. She converted to Judaism and changed her name to Esther when she converted. They were living in Chemnitz in southeast Germany, about 50 kilometers from the Czech border. My father was a champion skier, guitar player, and bantamweight boxing champion. He was well known throughout Germany. He belonged to his Jewish sports association known as the Maccabees. Because of his fame and his Jewish connection, he was also known to the Nazi Gestapo and was in danger of being arrested. At great personal danger, my parents Simon and Esther were married in Chemnitz in 1935. This was illegal because of the Nuremberg laws enacted by the Reichstag in 15 September 1935, with anti-Semitic and racist laws for the protection of German blood and honor. It forbade the marriage between Jews and Germans, and those that broke the law were first sent to prison and later to concentration camps. As the situation worsened, my father and now pregnant mother fled to Italy in 1937. Fortunately, none of her Christian family turned them in. My mother's pregnant sister Ellie, who was living in the apartment with my grandparents, was arrested and sent to work in a munitions factory as punishment for not turning in her sister. Aunt Ellie had 2 miscarriages while at hard labor for 2 years. My father's sister Ida lived in Milan and provided a connection in Italy. My father sold ice cream to support us. I was born in Milan in 1938 and named Manfred Sigmund from a list of Nazi authorized names. The rest of my father's family remained in Germany and were later murdered in concentration camps. A turning point came on in Kristallnacht, known as the November pogroms, on November 9th, 1938. Synagogues and Jewish businesses were destroyed. 30,000 Jewish men were sent to concentration camps. Once Germany and Italy became allied, the Nazis moved in and took over Italy. The Gestapo, or secret state police, began searching for Jews and sending them to concentration camps. My cousin Joe, Aunt Ida's son, was taken to a camp at age 5, and he survived there for the next 5 years. Ida had a friend who knew a Catholic bishop, and through him got Joe out of the camp. The bishop sent two men to the camp with papers saying Joe was a Catholic named Carlo Antonio and had been arrested by mistake. He was then taken to a monastery where he was baptized and lived out the war. The Jews became victims of universal immigration restrictions. All the countries around the world, including the United States and Britain, had closed their doors to the Jews who needed a safe haven. Miraculously, an opportunity arose: Shanghai. With the help of anti-German Italian partisans and money from HIAS, the Hebrew Immigration Assistance Society, we were smuggled to Genoa on the coast, where we got on an Italian cruise ship, the Conte Verde. We then sailed 8,000 miles through the Suez Canal, around India, to the coast of China. We sailed up the Yangtze to the Huangpu River, to a dock in the international settlement controlled by the British. The luxurious Italian cruise ship was in stark contrast to the Shanghai they would land in. Jewish refugees arrived in Hong Kong, part of Shanghai battered by war, though controlled by Japan, who were allied with the Nazis. There was no passport controls, allowing the Jews to land without papers. Many refugees, mostly middle-aged professionals, struggled to adapt to the harsh conditions. They came of political necessity, not economic reasons. It was scary to land in a city with no means to support themselves, did not speak the language, and had no prospects for employment. Hongqiu was like nothing the European Jews had ever seen before. Crowded, very dirty, smelly, hot and humid. It was 140 degrees by today's heat index. Wealthy Sephardic Jews, including the Sassoons and the Kaduris rebuilt bombed-out buildings into bunkhouses called Heime, German for home. With soup kitchens, substandard sanitation, and up to 150 people per room with rows and rows of steel bunk beds. They sent flatbed trucks to the docks to take the refugees to Hongqiu. The men slept in one room and the women and children in another. At that time, 5 cents would feed a refugee for a day. Since we had no clothes other than what we arrived in, we wore the same clothes every day, or hand-me-downs from other children. I distinctly remember the chicken wire embedded in the factory windows. In summer, all the steel beds were taken outside, placed in a huge pile, and set on fire to kill the lice. This huge fire was a treat for the kids to watch. Conditions were terrible. Shanghai was rife with every disease known to mankind. The water was polluted and had to be boiled. Since there was little in the way of sanitary facilities, men called potmen would come daily with hand-drawn carts and empty the sewage from the wooden buckets that we used every day. That became the fertilizer they sold for the vegetable fields. In 1940, my brother Ralph was born in the midst of all this poverty. Hongqiu, now the Jewish ghetto, was overwhelmed by refugees who were numbering over 18,000. Local charities struggled. The Joint Distribution Committees in New York sent social worker Laura Margolis to coordinate the relief, assuring basic shelter and food until 1941. Despite the hardship, a vibrant Jewish community emerged. Stores, bakeries, theaters, newspapers. My parents worked at China Fiber Company. My father worked at China Fiber Company as a mechanic, earning $3 a month. We children attended a British-style school built by Horace Kaduri. We received a strong education, speaking German at home, English in school, and some Chinese on the streets. Local Chinese children accepted us without anti-Semitism. In 1943, with pressure from the Nazis, the Japanese authorities established a designated area for stateless refugees and ordered all Jewish refugees since 1937 to move into the designated area within a month. The Japanese assigned Kano Goya to be the gatekeeper of the ghetto. He assigned people with colored armbands or tickets which allowed them to go out of the ghetto for their other jobs, if they had any, for a certain amount of time. The Nazis wanted to continue their solution to the Jewish problem and wanted to put us all on ships, sail them out to the China Sea, and scuttle the ships to drown us all. Luckily,